Hello and welcome back to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. I'm here in the studio with my friends and colleagues.
David Kennedy.
And Red Keating.
And I'm Julie Brown. So, hi guys, this is our first episode that we're recording in 2024. We have other ones that we've recorded that we'll release, but here we are in a new year. And the topic that we're going to cover is around the issue of, sometimes it's referred to as toxic positivity, that idea of like, let's think positive, let's only think good thoughts, let's only remember the good things, and the pressure that we put on each other with that kind of attitude and speech towards each other. And I know that when we were talking about this, I had actually just finished having a conversation with an individual who's ill, living with life-threatening illness, and somebody had just visited their home. And the person who's ill was having a hard day. And what they heard back was, well, you need to think positive. You need to, think good thoughts. You need to keep focusing on the positive. And what was so challenging for them was, so on top of everything else I'm going through, I shouldn't be feeling sad. I shouldn't be having thoughts of fear or worried that my treatment's not working. I should also be thinking positive too. So that's where we're going to kind of dive in on this episode.
And I think all of us have had that experience, Julie. In fact, I think we've all had the experience where it's really polarized into, you have to think only positive thoughts, as if that is not just helping you, but is also the solution to what it is you're facing, or the cure. And this, we call, whatever we might term the magical thinking, the thoughts. But it's really often, in my experience, I've heard it labeled in a way that people are really feeling the responsibility of their own getting better by that use of just being positive.
I know that I certainly experienced this in my own illness journey, and I experienced it in a few ways. So one was feeling the pressure of, oh my goodness, what if this does make a difference? And like, I just can't live there right now in this positive place when I feel so overwhelmed with what's happening to me. And I feel so overwhelmed with the fear, with the terror, with all the unknowns, with the uncertainty. And I'm supposed to be thinking positive, and I can't pull that out. I can pull out hope. I can pull out, I'm glad that other people see that maybe positive, good days are ahead for me. But when I'm here in these days, I'm just trying to survive these days. And so there was a part of me, though, because I had so much fear about my health, there was this little niggling fear that said, but what if? What if I am turning against myself by not being able to hold these positive thoughts? That was hard.
Yeah, and then things start to become your responsibility. If things don't go the way that you wanted them to, are you to blame? Is there fault involved if you couldn't have been positive enough, right? And it negates the the whole person, and the whole range of emotions that someone who is living with a life-threatening illness experiences on a daily basis, right? And if we're only allowed to be positive, where's the room for all of those other emotions, Julie, that you just sort of listed through in terms of what a person would run through in a day, in a minute, in an hour, as they sort of cope and live with each day? And that extra responsibility, it's just another burden, isn't it?
It sure is. And I remember thinking that, and eventually I did kind of just get brave enough to think, okay, if that's what people need from me, they can't be my people going through this, because I have to not feel like I have to perform for them or to hit some bar for them when I'm with them, because I this is hard enough what I'm doing. Like, this is the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. And so to have another layer on top of that, that I'm not supposed to show my suffering, my fear, but think positive, it just felt unbearable. It just felt like that is not possible for me to do.
What do you think people, when they give that advice, to say you just got to be positive? What do you think that's really about? Is that about the person who is living with this life-threatening, or is that more a statement of their own inability to deal with the reality of emotions that they are experiencing in this person that they love or care for?
That's certainly what I've come to, the way I've come to understand it, David, is that it's hard to be with human suffering. It's hard to watch others suffer. And we feel our own helplessness, our own powerlessness when we're watching somebody suffer. And that can feel intolerable to us, right? That causes distress in us. And the reality is that some things, some suffering can't be fixed, right? So I think we're far more comfortable with the problems that human beings have, where it's like, I bring you the problem and you have a solution, or we can come up with a solution. But some things just are. Some suffering just is, and it's meant to be, we have to learn how to bear it and carry it. And hopefully we can do that in community with people who help us bear the burden of that. But that has been my way of coming to understand that the distress of feeling our own helplessness, our powerlessness, is what makes us sometimes default to that place. Like, your pain is scary to me, and because I can't fix it, and because I can't make it better, then that causes this distress in me, and I default to this place. That's my understanding.
And so then, oh, sorry, David. I was going to say, and so then it's the responsibility of the person with the illness to make the support person more comfortable, right? It's then again that another responsibility. And so it's sort of like, I'm sorry that my emotions that are on the sad, scared, what we would society would maybe call the more difficult or negative side, are causing you such discomfort. That you need me to be this person so that you'll feel all right. You need me to be this positive person so that you can be in my company.
Is there sense that our attitude, our emotional attitudes, have some impact physically? I mean, we're whole beings. We talk about it. I mean, we all recognize, for instance, that stress and the negative side of things has physical impact on our bodies. Is it possible for the reverse to be true? I'm not saying, and this brings me to the question of what people are looking for when they say be positive, but I'm wondering if we can at least acknowledge that there may be some physical impact, not curative to the disease, but perhaps in our physical being, that does come from a very positive attitude that doesn't deny the other emotions, but is part of that whole realm. I'm just wondering what you've experienced in that.
Well, there is certainly a power in positive thinking, and yeah, I guess it's good to balance that out. That it's okay to be positive, right? That it can be a good place to go every once in a while.
But what
And
are people meaning by that, though, Red? What are they? When you say that, what does being positive? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, well, that's going to be individuals of the conversation, I would think. But I think what they're thinking of is, say, be uplifted, be happy, use your energy to feel good, as opposed to the way you're feeling so down, because when you're down, it's really heavy. And if you felt lighter, you might feel better.
Mhm. And,
And those are hard words, lighter and heavier, but I think we all know what I'm trying to get at when I say those things.
and I
Sorry,
think,
Julie.
no, I think you're right, David, that I would not want this conversation to deter anyone from thinking positive. And I would not want it to deter anyone from supporting someone who's in a positive place, right? And so I want to be really clear that if you are moving through a journey of suffering and you authentically can hold positives and you find them and they feel true to you, I think that's a very beautiful, powerful thing. And I just have to imagine, in terms of even our just own immune systems, being able to hold that has got to have a benefit. And I know there is lots of research around the power of, there's a whole area of research called positive psychology. And we know there's benefits to it. And so I certainly, for anyone who's listening to that, who's been able to live in that place, I absolutely respect it and invite it in. For me, when I think of it, I'm thinking of where the just think positive is being kind of forced or expected from someone, and it's not authentically where they are. Right? So where it's saying, oh, we don't want to invite in your fear here. We're not going to make space for your fear or your pain or your sadness or your worry. Let's think positive. So it's where we're going to make room for these more kind of desirable emotional states, but we're not going to make room for this. And so I think that, because I'm sure you have too, I have sat with people who are in a very positive, uplifting place, whether they think they're going to be cured or whether they don't think they are, but they have a real mindset around the power of positivity. And if that feels authentic and congruent for them, I think that's a beautiful thing and something I want to support for them. What I just don't want to do is give somebody the message that we need to hang out here in the positive space so we can avoid the negative space.
And I also thank you, Julie, and I agree with everything you just expressed there. I think too, for me, the difference is people who want to stay positive or feel the pressure to stay positive as if that's a cure to the disease. And I think being positive around how am I living? How can I live with this disease and be positive with that? I think that is a very healthy and helpful response, as long as you say, Red, it makes room for all these other emotions to be there too. So I think thinking positive, being positive can be part of our makeup. It just can't be the whole makeup. And again, I may challenge, and I have with people, I may challenge what they believe that positive is about. And, people say, well, I've got a diagnosis of stage 4 and it's, there's nothing they can do, but I'm staying positive because I just believe if I be positive, then that disease will be gone. I'm not sure that's that's a healthy being positive. I think we can be positive about things, and maybe that's something that would interesting to chat about. But it doesn't have to be the cure. But I'm wondering, at least at first, when people are newly diagnosed, the being positive is about the cure in many, many cases that I've experienced. As the disease moves along, that being positive gets harder if it's maintained at the cure. Can we shift that being positive to mean something a little differently and not be the all-consuming energy piece?
And I like your question, but what do you mean when you say positive? Because be positive sounds like, just say no. There's a slogan feel to that in terms of, well, if I'm not feeling all that positive and you're telling me to be positive, how do I get there? How do I be positive when I don't feel it? And so how do you change course, or how do you change, how you're thinking and your attitude and your mind to go from a place where you're in that concern and worry, and maybe you're sort of chronically there and someone is saying, you got to be positive. Well, show me how. I've lost my ability to see the road to hope, positivity, joy, right? How do I find my way back? Because I've lost it. And I think that's it gets to that place, just say no to drugs. Well, there's more to it than just saying no, and there's more to it than just being positive. And so it's exploring, how do I find my way back? How do I work my way out of and wrestle my way back up, out of the little quagmire that I found, emotional quagmire that I found myself in, that just swirls with negativity, or swirls with worry, swirls with concern, swirls with fear, so it doesn't help. You're telling me what I should be, but I'm telling you I don't know how to be that. I don't know how to get there.
Yeah, I'm in one place and
Yeah.
I'm on one island. That's a different island. Where's the bridge to that island? And I just want to add another layer to it as well. Certainly in there's a culture certainly around cancer that is so much about being a fighter and a warrior. And you're going to fight this, and you're in a battle, and there's a war and a warrior. And some of the stories that were brought to me and that I've heard through my time with clients too, it's almost like being a warrior is almost kind of like you're behaving like you don't even have cancer. Like, you're going to think positive. You're going to go out with your little fanny pack of chemo on around your waist, and you're just going to go out and you're going to do things, or maybe you're still going to go to work, or you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. And, I remember someone saying, well, so-and-so, she just didn't let chemo slow her down. Like, she just kept go, go, go. And I can remember hearing those stories, and for myself going like, I can't do that. Like, I am not in the emotional space to do that. And so now, on top of having cancer and also worrying that I caused my cancer, that I did something wrong, and not able to think positive, now I'm also not, kind of behaving or doing cancer right. Right. And so it was, I mean, it's just, we do this. And and lots of people were saying to me, like, you're going to fight this, and you're so strong, and you're a warrior. And of course, I'm not feeling very strong, of course, through that. And here's what I came to understand. And here's how I redefined that for myself. That strength, being a fighter and being a warrior, was getting out of bed those days, was showing up for my treatments, was if I had to cry all day, to cry all day, but get up the next day. The strength, the fight, the warrior was just doing it, however it looked. And if you need to be someone who's still out there in the community being busy, and I'm not, it's still strength, right? It's still strength. And it's not the absence of finding it hard. It's just, that's how I'm doing it.
So much language around that impacts us in our not just our thinking, but in terms of how then we're supposed to act. I recall many times in conversations with clients around, they're talking about being a warrior and being strong and being positive. And I remember asking them, what's it feel like when you wake up in the middle of the night? What's it like then? Are you positive at that moment? Are you a warrior at that moment? And honestly, Brad and Julie, I'm sure your experiences are similar. That's the moment where you could almost see the difference in the person, where they just kind of exhale and say, you know what, those are the moments I really struggle with, and that's the reality. And I try to be positive for other people, but when I in the middle of the night, when I'm by myself, that's just too much. I just can't do that.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, yeah, it's again back to that accepting the whole range of experience that a person can have at any given moment. And so I remember there was a fellow years and years and years ago when I was in palliative care. He was in palliative care. And what were we doing? We were planning, because he spends some time in Florida. We planned his trip. He was driving down to Florida and stopping at different hospitals for his chemo treatments on his way. I mean, he was just not going to let cancer stop him from doing anything. And that was his way, right? And that's okay. But if someone else has a different way that maybe feels a little bit more labored, and I keep having to remind everybody also that everybody's cancer is different and everybody that responds to treatment differently. And so one will
And
say,
their
oh,
chemos are different,
oh,
and their
exactly.
dosages are different.
But they'll say, oh, they've got this type of cancer and that person has that type of cancer. Why aren't they doing as well? And it's like, well, because it's not going to be the same treatment and it's not the same body. They're not the same person. And so they're going to react differently. And so I think the key thing is to keep the whole person in mind, that there's a range there. And we use this language like battle warrior. We're going to bring out the big guns. We're bringing out the big artillery. And it puts a person almost at war with themselves, right? I'm at war with my body. How am I supposed to be comfortable inside that, right? How am I supposed to find that peace and happiness when everyone is telling me and using these sort of violent war type words to describe what's happening inside of me right now? And we fall into those words because we do. I can see how those words came to be. We're fighting, we're battling, we're trying to motivate somebody who'd maybe not have the motivation or the energy to keep trying, right? And those are the words we use, but I think we have to find better language other than the sort of the violent war type language to describe how people are trying to get better. People are trying to heal. People are trying to recover. People are trying to move through a disease process.
And the reality is, and I've often thought this, few times I've said it, but I'm very careful about it, is that you're fighting a war that you're going to lose, and you end up losing. And when I know people put in that in their obituaries, they fought a courageous battle with, well, yeah, they did, but they didn't win the war, if that's the battle. So if we make the battle about cure, then you don't win. If it's a battle to say, I'm going to live, and I'm going to live
Until
till
I
the
die.
end, until I
Yes.
die, that's my battle, then I say go for it. But if the focus of the battle is the disease and the curing of that disease, then we lose. And I think we have to encourage people to recognize where they put that imagery toward. What is it you're fighting for?
Mm.
Can we say, yeah, I'm going to fight to have the best life I can have until I die?
Mhm.
So your example of your palliative patient who wanted to go to Florida, I would say that was his battle, to say, I'm going to get there, and that battle, I'm going to win that one. Good for him.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a battle to cure the disease, because that rarely happens. So I think, and again, I want to just kind of bring it back to this point about, we're not, the opposite of what we're saying about being careful about the positive thing is not to live negatively. I mean, that's not what we're telling people. I think what we want to say is, what is the focus of that positivity? What is that focus of that fight? What is the focus of the energy that we only have so much of? Where are we going to expend that?
Mhm.
And how do we encourage people to do that well
Mm.
while living with this life-threatening illness?
I was just thinking, sometimes what I try to do for clients, and this was done for me by a few people in my life, is saying it's like this right now. And this is a hard time. And so I want to meet you there. And I can hold this hope or this belief that it will change, it will be different. And sometimes I even say to people, I'm not even saying it's going to get better. It's just it's going to be different, right? And for people, sometimes, we should, and we'll talk about grief. I will say to people sometimes, it won't always be like this, but it is right now.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good.
So where I want to hold, I do want to reflect that there will be times that are different than these times. If that is accurate, and I never give false hope, right? But if I believe that there is, and still make space and honor what's here in the present. And I will say that was really helpful for me. I did have some people who would say, Julie, I think you're going to get through this. And that you're going to come out on the other side of this. And I understand that this is such a scary, hard place that you're in. Right. And that was okay. That was okay because they were not diminishing where I was. They were not diminishing my suffering. And they were saying, and here's this other little part that I can hold for you.
And Julie, if I can ask, how was that interaction different from you on a feelings level than someone saying, "Oh, come on, Julie, let's just get positive. Let's be positive today." Like, you got to find the positivity.
Yeah. I mean, I just found that positivity thing so impossible. And that's not to say that I didn't have moments that I did feel positive, or moments where I was like, I'm doing this. Like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm getting through this. Or, moments where I would let myself hope. Like, here I am several years later. Like, I can remember one moment, like allowing myself to dream about how I wanted to host like a thank you party for all the people who helped me get through it, like years from now, right? Like I can remember allowing myself to like hang out there because that actually felt really good for me. But what I really needed, and I think I was really clear about this in the episode where I told my story, was I just needed people to meet me where I was at and not try to shift that. And if I shifted it, then to follow me there. But if I wasn't there, not to force me to be there.
I think there's a difference that you've alluded to several times. There's a difference for me between the idea of just being positive and the idea of holding hope.
Yes.
I think often our being positive is simply an expression of our own fears, whatever we say. I think hope is something deeper. I think hope is rooted in reality without demanding it to be what it is, what we hope for. Whereas being positive, in my experience, when I've had clients use those terms, or I hear people using those terms, it's not rooted in anything that's solid. It's just simply an expression that is thrown out there as if it's magical, and that if you would just be positive, it'll have magical results. But there isn't. That hope for me is something quite different, and I think that's what we hold on to without having to have it come exactly the way we are hoping for. But it's a hope that we have.
Yeah.
And I think too, the concept of being positive. I think, when Julie, you said sometimes it was just getting out of bed, that was positive. But when people say to be positive, I think they're saying be happy.
Yes.
Find joy.
Think happy things.
Yeah, and that will take you to the cure, or that will take you to the better place. And if you don't get there, I just wanted to comment, if it's a palliative situation and it's just be positive and all the warrior language, and if you don't If it doesn't work, then somehow you failed.
Yeah.
Somehow it's your fault that the cancer won. You were beaten, you know. And then after the courageous battle, and it's not that at all. It wasn't a win or lose. It was the disease process. This was the end of someone's life, not
Well,
a game, not a
and
game, not a.
I personally feel very what's the word? Defensive, angry, even when people say, you know, that so and so beat cancer because they did this and this and this. Like, kind of, they did the right things, right? Like, they thought positive and they drank their wheatgrass and they did, you know, these things. And sometimes it's like, does that imply then the people who have not, quote, beat cancer didn't do the right things? No. It's highly disrespectful to those people who have had those courageous journeys where there's been disease progression. It's not all, most of it is not in our control. It is not in our control. So when I see people make these claims who did have an unexpected outcome, and the cancer did go dormant or whatever, and they'll say, well, it's because of this or that. We don't actually know, right? In most of those cases, like, people, I've heard, you know, people say, well, it's because, you know, he did this or he did that. He had high dose vitamin C and he thought positive and he meditated and he did all of these things, right? And it's like, we don't actually know it was any of those things. We don't. We don't know. He could have done none of those things and might have still been cured, right? Like, we don't actually know, but we speak about those things like they're truths and like it's science and it's the right way. And so then therefore, what does that say about the people who have not survived that and there has been disease progression? So I just think, like, let's be really sensitive to that, right? So we can celebrate those people who've had these unexpected outcomes or where there's been recovery. Absolutely, we want to celebrate that, and we can be curious about their journey. But let's be really careful about the language we use and what that it can be being seen to imply for people where there has been disease progression. Not because it was their fault. Was it their fault?
Mhm.
That, you know, David, you and I were saying before we started recording tonight, we're all terminal. We're all terminal.
So what's the message? I'm thinking of the listener now. What's the message for somebody who is trying to support a friend, a family member through cancer treatment? And maybe it's a palliative situation. Maybe it's moving toward attempt of cure. What is the main message in terms of this concept of the language that we use and the way that we are in relationship with someone in that situation? What's the takeaway?
Well, for me, it's what I was saying about, can we shift the language focus onto living, not to curing? So can we encourage people to support? And I also encourage people not to be the lead necessarily, but the encouragement of a person's journey, to be a good observer, to be somebody who can observe where the person is and encourage the person where they are, not to try to pull them out of where they think they should be. So the message for me, for people, I would say, if you're a caregiver or a friend or somebody who's journeying with somebody with a life-threatening illness, is that two things. Can we focus on how do we encourage the person to live well until they die? And secondly, can you be a listener first and engage that person where they are? And if they're in the pit, not trying to pull them out of it, but rather agree to go down and sit with them in it. And what is it that they need, and how do you do that? So again, the language to me is really key in terms of what it is you're trying to say with those words, and finding ways to do it meaningfully, but not as somebody who's pulling somebody along. but somebody who can encourage somebody to do what they are needing to do for the next step.
It's very much the same. I'm thinking about on if we go to the other side of this, if we go to the bereavement side,
We hear the same language, don't we?
We do, and we hear the same sort of messages that, well, it's time to get over it. It's time for you to move on. Those are the kinds of statements that get made.
Think of the good times. Think of the good times.
Yeah.
Like, let your good memories comfort you.
Yeah, and they're the things that I think we fall back on again, because as the person's making those statements, we're trying to make the situation more palatable for ourselves. And when someone tells someone that they have to, it's time to move on, it's time to get over it, right? Those are statements that really don't understand what living with grief and what living with loss is like, and that it isn't something to get over. It's something that we learn to live with, that we carry with us for the rest of our lives. We don't get over it. I always say to people, and I'm not sure, it's if you're really frustrated by or offended by someone saying, it's just time that you got over this, you got to move on. I think the only response to that is, I'm sorry that my grief causes you such discomfort. But this is where I am right now. And it's where I need to be.
Yeah, and thanks, Red, for that, because it's absolutely true that same message gets put on the people in grief as if being positive is going to take care of all the problem. Yeah. And not allowing anybody to feel those experiences, the wide variety of experiences that are emotions that come out of grief. I've mentioned this before, I think, on another podcast, but I love that song by Willie Nelson. He says grief is not something you get over; it's something you get through, and it's true. I mean, you never really get through it all anyway, but it's not a matter of just think positive, good thoughts, memories, and your grief goes away. That does not negate grief.
Yeah, and those kinds of statements also, like in the think positive statements, put the responsibility onto the griever for managing the emotions of the other person, right? Yeah. Again, and it's another weight that the person who's grieving doesn't need. It's another responsibility that they shouldn't have to carry.
One of the central thoughts that I carry in my mind with people to guide me so that I hopefully don't fall down these kind of rabbit holes is that really what I'm wanting to do when I'm with someone is like, understand, what is it like to be you? What is it like to be you on this day, in this hour, in this world, whether it's living with this grief, whether it's living with this diagnosis, whether it's living with its treatment, whatever it is. Maybe it might be that, what's it like to be you in general right now? Or like, what is it just like to be you today?
Yeah.
Today, in this moment. And we don't even need to ask that question necessarily. But if we can, David, as you say, like, be a listener first. That's what we're listening for, is to listen to understand, right? Listen to understand, what is it like to be you right now? And if we hear positivity there, then we hear that and we make space for that, right? If we hear, the suffering, the pain, the loss, and we go, yeah, I know, I hear that too.
But in that example, Julie, it's led by the individual.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the difference. It's led by the person who's living through the experience.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a therapist. I think that's the key for people who are friends and caregivers and family. If we could learn that our first step is one of listening and understanding. I love that phrase. What's it like to be you today? And because I know what it might have been like for you yesterday, but what about today? And so if that's our first step, then we can maybe find a much healthier way to engage with people.
So any Any final thoughts on this? I mean, there's just, I mean, we run into it all the time, don't we? We hear it all the time.
Yep.
Where one of the places I hear it is just the pressure it creates for people, or their own sense of guilt because they can't stay in that positive spot. So, I try to do a good job of just kind of saying, well, come on, I sometimes might use some profanity in the therapy room in those moments and say, yeah, screw that,
Yeah.
But any final thoughts?
I think one thing is that for people who are trying to support another person, whether it's on the bereavement side or on a treatment side, is that what I often hear is that when people make the be positive statements, or you've got to just time to get over it, those actual statements offend the individual that you're saying them to, and actually set them back. They get frustrated. They get, they can question their own sense of, am I doing this right? And it's not helpful, even though the person has the greatest intentions of what they're trying. They think what they're doing is supporting. And I think it's very clear that if you just listened, if you didn't try to drive that bus and force the way you want things to be on the other person, it will go much better. The person will feel heard and understood, and then that might actually draw them out. But I think that people really need to hear that quite often, or I hear quite often, that statements like that, it's just time for you to get over it. You got to move on. People take great offense to those statements. And I don't think the person who's saying them has that intention. But that can sometimes be the impact. So
Yeah.
Be careful how you're making those statements, I would say to folks, right? Try to find that place to listen as opposed to speak and drive.
And ask yourself when we're using the language around being positive, what it is we mean by that. What am I suggesting? And am I putting pressure on that person? And that's the last thing that we should be doing.
Yeah.
And so if anything, if nothing else, if through this podcast we can cause people to reflect and maybe think before they use the language of, what is it I mean by this, or what is it? Is this helpful, or am I really being honest about what this person needs or what I need? Then I think it's a good discussion.
Yeah.
And my final contribution would just be back to something I said earlier, that not all problems can be fixed, right? And sometimes our work is just to be with people in the struggle, in the pain. And so sometimes we're throwing that out there as an attempt to fix something that can't be fixed. But that still doesn't mean that we can't make a difference in other ways, in the ways that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks.
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 Have a
Take care, everyone.
positively great day.
May 2024 be a positive year for you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough. Music by Paradise Garage. Technical support provided by Sean and Jonah Heichert. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio. You can find more episodes for free on most major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. If you want to support us, please follow and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And tell your friends. It really makes a difference.